All right, and welcome to the International Code Council Region 1 and Region 1 radio show. My name is Tim Spears. I'm the treasurer for Region 1 and also the host of the Region 1 radio program. Region 1 was established in 2014, and we're made up of 3 states, California, Hawaii, and Nevada. That includes 32 chapters. We're dedicated to excellence in education and engagement to promote safer environment by bringing code professionals like myself and Kevin together today. These videos and podcasts are a series designed to highlight the individuals of the chapter and that make up our region and share their experiences. Today on the show, I'm excited to have join me Kevin McOsker. He is the Building and Safety Director for the City of Las Vegas and Chairperson for the Southern Nevada Building Officials Association, and also a past president to ICC Region 1. So with that, hi Kevin, welcome to Region 1 Radio and our Code Official Spotlight.
Thank you, Tim. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm very proud that you pronounced Nevada correctly, because that's something that Nevadans take very personal when it's called Nevada. So thank you for making the correct pronunciation.
Well, so also too, I grew up in Iowa. So have you ever heard of the little town called Nevada?
No.
So there's a little town outside of Ames. It's called Nevada, and so it's actually. So I used to work for the state of Iowa. So I'm fairly familiar with it, but it's outside the little college town of Ames where Iowa State's at. So, but yeah, Nevada, Iowa.
And it's spelled the same?
Spelled the same.
Oh.
Yep.
There's a third pronunciation.
Yeah, so Nevada, and Nevada, right? The long A, or
yes.
Is that the long A? I guess my grammar is not what it used to be when I was in school. So.
Yeah. When I stopped writing essays in college, I'm pretty much with you. I'm pretty much done with the long A, short A, when to use a comma, when to use a semicolon.
Yeah, and the funny thing is like I remember I went back and I got my graduate degree, and when I was getting my graduate degree, I was like, oh man, when I did my undergrad, I thought I was done writing papers, and then I had to write all those papers, and it just I contemplated going back and getting my doctorate, and then at the end I said, why would I do something like that? That just sounds silly. Well, welcome, Kevin. Now, to begin, can you share your background and really the area that you serve? Like we mentioned Las Vegas, but I know in some of my previous conversations, like I met with Rick Rogier, the Deputy Fire Marshal for the city, and then also Sam Palmer for Clark County. I know there's a little difference between what a lot of people think Las Vegas is and what Las Vegas truly is. So can you share and talk about the background and maybe some of those differences as it relates back to the city of Las Vegas?
Sure. So Las Vegas is a city of about 650,000 people, 140 square miles. That's the census and Wikipedia information that you would get if you Googled Las Vegas. Most people think of Las Vegas as a Las Vegas Strip and downtown, Red Rock, Lake Mead, and that area. But we actually, Clark County is the jurisdiction that covers the Las Vegas Strip. The city of Las Vegas covers the downtown, Fremont Street, Fremont East, the Brewery District, the Arts District, most of Summerlin, Sky Canyon, a lot of residential, a lot of downtown urban, and a casino strip in the downtown area. If you're not familiar with what Fremont Street is, visually you've remembered being downtown and had the big Fremont Street experience, big cover over the downtown area, and so that's the downtown Fremont Street strip that we're so proud of here at the city of Las Vegas. So it's not the big city that everybody thinks of, not the Strip, but I used to work for the county. I used to work for Sam and Ron Lynn over at the county, but I made the jump here. Next week will be 5 years I've been at the city.
Oh, wow, that's quite a while.
Yeah.
And what I mean by quite a while, a lot of times we see the longevity in different places. When I first started my career, I thought I'd stay there forever. But since then, I've been a multitude of other locations, which I think that sometimes that's important, right? To be able to get experience elsewhere and share those experiences. And it gives you a little bit more well-rounded perspective. So in speaking about like background, in addition to Clark County, how long have you been in the building safety profession? And kind of what have been your stops throughout along the way?
Well, it's kind of interesting you asked me that question because I kind of think of my construction background starting literally like right after graduation. I started working for a masonry contractor when I graduated high school in Colorado, and I was a hod carrier. We did a lot of fireplaces, masonry fireplaces, a lot of masonry, real masonry veneer, some retaining walls, and this was in the foothills of Colorado. In the Evergreen conifer area,
Okay.
if folks from Colorado are familiar with that area.
I'm very familiar. Actually, I worked for the city a while, so I worked for Estes Park for a bit. I was a fire marshal there. And then also I worked for the city of Colorado Springs for a bit.
Okay. So we were a little bit west of Denver, in kind of foothill bedroom community. I wouldn't call it affluent, but it was a very nice. Evergreen's a very nice area. But yeah, so that's where I kind of started my career in construction. I worked my first summer before I went to college. I was originally going to be a petroleum geologist, but I actually majored. I joke around that I majored in football and partying instead of petroleum or geology. So my grades suffered, so I ended up dropping out and continuing to work for Bill Foster Masonry in Colorado for another 18 months, and then I ended up joining the Air Force. It's kind of my dad had thought that maybe that wasn't construction wasn't a good career path in small town Colorado, and he suggested that maybe I look for military. So I ended up joining the Air Force, and luckily for me, the Air Force in 1986 had sent me to Las Vegas, Nevada at Nellis Air Force Base. So that began my my tenure with the city of Las Vegas and living in this valley. It was 1986. I joke with folks that I left Colorado. I went to my tech school was in Colorado as well. I was a munitions technician, and I left there in a snowstorm on February 26, 1986. And it was a blizzard, and I landed in Vegas, and it was 80 degrees. And I said, I'm never going back to snow. And, 35, 40, 36, 37 years later, I'm still here. So I ended up getting a degree in civil engineering from UNLV while I was stationed at Nellis as an enlisted person. And I ended up doing about 1 year in an outside engineering firm. The ups and downs of the consulting engineering field, 60 hours for a month and then 30 hours the next month. I wanted a little more stable lifestyle, so I was looking for a more stable job that was a constant 40 hours instead of, massive amounts of work and then letdowns. So I ended up getting a job working for the Clark County Building Department in 1992.
Okay.
So I started out as kind of an entry-level engineer. I was originally doing some inspection activities, some third-party special inspection monitoring on structural projects like the MGM building and the theme park. I did a little bit at the Luxor, some other projects, and I helped inspectors at times with some other issues. I did some grading activities and whatnot. So my background kind of started out into the structural field, and that's kind of where, as a civil engineer, obviously I was interested in structural as an undergrad, but it was this job afforded me the opportunity to really stay focused on kind of the structural side of our business. I ended up, after a couple of years, getting my engineering license and an opportunity to promote to a structural plans examiner. So I took off my boots and I took off my hard hat and put on a tie and a button-up shirt and went into the office, and it was a little bit of a transition, of course. I think anyone who's gone from the field to the office goes through a little bit of that transition. But I tell people that being a plans examiner was my favorite job I've ever had. in the building and safety industry in 30 years. It's my favorite job I've ever had. Now, being the building official for the city of Las Vegas is getting really close to being number one, but right now, maybe hindsight's a little more 2020 with being a plan checker. But I really enjoyed the opportunity to engage with customers and talk to customers. And I'll be honest, I was kind of that shy engineer when I was in the office, because I was kind of really in with giants of the industry. I was with, contractors who were doing big projects on the Strip. I was with structural engineers or designing the massive projects on the Strip. And I was really, just a couple years out of school and just licensed. And I'm like, man, these guys are intimidating. So I was really kind of shy, but that job kind of broke me out of my shell. I ended up from there becoming the supervisor of the, at the time we had two supervisors in plan review, a commercial and a residential supervisor. I ended up taking the commercial supervisor. So I ended up moving a little bit outside of my comfort zone and getting into commercial plan review supervision. So I had plumbing guys, mechanical guys, electrical plan reviewers, the non-structural and the structural guys. And so that was an interesting transition. I'd say about 5 or 6 years into that, the department grew enough where we hired another supervisor, and they put me back with just the structural guys. And then in 2008, just before the recession, I made the leap to go from a plan check supervisor to the manager of inspections.
Okay.
What's interesting about that job was, because I was a licensed PE and a supervisor, it was the same pay grade as a manager of inspections, except it didn't come with the protection of the union. I was an at-will employee right before the recession, so not the best timing in the world to make that move. But I survived it. I've never felt like that was that big of a risk. I felt my experience and what I could bring to the table would cover that, and I had some longevity with the department. So I did that for about 3 years, and during the course of the time we had in that tough period between 2008 and 2010 and 11, we had laid some staff members off at the county building department and reorganized, and I went over to code enforcement, and we'd had this program called resort inspections, where we went into the existing resort properties on the Strip and re-inspected for life safety issues. So I managed those two programs. Gave me a really good perspective on existing construction and in the code enforcement world, because that's a whole other animal amongst itself in our industry. Is code enforcement just completely different than people trying to get into compliance and people not being in compliance and doing something without permits and what have you. We had our plan check manager at the time decide he was going to leave our office and move back to Washington, D.C. And so I just remember this. We were all in a staff meeting, and we had all the managers sitting around, and they said, well, which one of us has had plan review experience, because they're going to take over plan review? And there wasn't a single one of them that was a plan reviewer. And I knew, I'm going right back to plan review. So in 2012, I was reassigned to plan review as the manager of plan review and permits for the Clark County Building Department, and enjoyed that quite a bit. But the building official at the city of Las Vegas came to me in 2015, early 2016, and said, hey, I'm looking to retire for a year. My manager of building is going to retire along with me before I go, and I'd like to bring someone along and mentor you for a year, and then I'll retire and you can take over the department. And I was really intrigued by that, and the opportunity came up, and the pay looked good, and the 4-day work week looked amazing as well. Yeah. And I made a jump to the city, and instead of it being a year, the former building official left in 6 months, so I didn't have as much time to get mentored as I would have liked. But they say that some people are born to greatness, and some people have greatness thrust upon them. It was thrust upon me. And then, it was a few months. I was acting building official, and in November of 2017, they made me the building official full-time and ratified me at City Council. And I've been doing it I've been with the city almost 5 years now. Next week, it'll be 5 years to City of Las Vegas.
Wow. That's some longevity. I mean, just in that, the Las Vegas area. So, I've got a couple questions on your background. You talk about, I'll be honest, you're the first person I've ever heard say that you enjoyed plan review the most. I've done plan review, and I will tell you that is the one thing I would go out and happily do an inspection all day over plan review. I have a harder time. And for me, it's more of, and as you know, starting this podcast and speaking to people, I have a hard time not talking to people, believe it or not. And so being in an office looking something two-dimensional, those plans don't talk back to me, and so I don't.
Yes,
it doesn't register.
Yeah. I guess from my perspective, it was the opportunity to collaborate with other folks. Get on the phone, talk to the engineer, like, hey, what were you thinking? I'm looking at this, and having people at the front counter with structural changes, small modifications, and talking to them. And so that's what I liked. I liked conversing with people. It was the people part of it that I liked the most, but it was also just uncovering the mystery, solving the question marks on the plans. That when you start looking at the plans, what is it that you're what is it they're doing? How are they getting to a point of compliance? And I always said, and I always told people when I looked at plans, I said, I'm looking for what's right. Mm-hmm. Show me what's right, and then it's like a sieve, right? The stuff that I need to ask about will fall to the bottom, and I'll ask those questions. I'm not looking for what's wrong. I'm going to assume everything on the plans are right, and then work backwards and come up with a list of items that need clarification or correction.
Yep. Well, and that's a good perspective on plan review. Like you just mentioned, the aspect of, because typically plan review is the more analytical, the higher, I don't want to say the higher level, but it is very analytical and being able to sort through it. Like here where I'm at, we do a lot of performance-based design and alternative means and methods, and to be able to see that, and then be able to see that not documentation, but be able to see the plans and then the supporting documents to be able to support that design. We've got a large storage facility that's going to be 5-story. I think they're starting to pop up throughout the country, and it's like 5 stories in height, 5 million or 4 million square feet, and conveyors and different elevator shafts and things like that to be able to move the product, and robots all over the place, and being able to see that. So I could see that aspect of it, because I think that's very impressive. I mean, to be able to see those things and be able to work with people that are kind of behind the scenes designing it, and I think that's kind of neat.
Right.
So, so you've had private sector experience. So I'm just curious what you kind of drew from that private sector, and even your military experience, to kind of help shape you, and maybe not necessarily just shape your code enforcement experience, but what skills did you find that were extremely beneficial coming from outside of code enforcement and now into the building safety arena? So
I would. The one thing that the military gave me was a level of discipline and focus. I was 19 years old when I joined the Air Force. I was a little bit not as focused as I was, but I learned some discipline and focus, and especially when you're juggling a job at night. And I was an airman during the night. I worked normally swings or graveyard shifts, and I was a college student during the day. And in the meantime, I got married. So I was juggling like 3 different lives. And so when you have that in your life, you have to this is the time I need to do X, and this is the time I need to do Y, and this is the time I need to do Z. And so I became very disciplined in focusing on certain tasks and getting things done. So that was one of the things that shaped me. The private sector experience really gave me a respect for being on the other side of the counter and helping customers and just giving them the level of respect that they're due, and not assuming that they're trying to get one over on the building department or the fire department or something. That they're trying to serve their client, they're trying to do the best job that they can, and even when I was in the private sector, I knew very little about the codes and the standards. And I knew what a design was. I knew what I needed to do to make a design, but I didn't know much about the regulatory requirements that were listed. And so, part of that process was I bring it, get something back from the city. And I say, okay, well, look up the code. We had one set of code books in the building, and we'd look that up and make those corrections. So, I was I guess the private sector experience gave me the ability to kind of look at things from their side of their point of view, and not just assume that they're trying to get one over on the city or the county or the code official. They're just trying to do their job, and I always try to respect that component of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things. Like I had a conversation with an architect just the other day, and she said, it was kind of on a contentious issue, and so we were talking back and forth, and I just said, it's all about perspective, and we started talking about things, and I really tried to walk her and through it and educate her on why the code was what the code was, and at the end she's like, I really appreciate you taking the time. And not just saying it's because I am the AHJ and I said so. And so she really respected that. And so she's called me on a couple other things, which has been great. And hopefully that's an advocate for really code enforcement moving forward, right? That she knows that we're not an obstacle. We're just trying to help them get through the process to make sure that it all meets. And so, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things. I think everybody's trying to do the right thing. It's just trying to get there, and how do we get there, and how do we best facilitate that? So
I would say that nobody wakes up in the morning, gets dressed for work and says, I'm going to go in and mess somebody's life up. I'm going to go in and do a terrible job. They go, I'm going to do a good job today. I'm going to help somebody. Right. I'm going to do good for society. Right. So I think that's the people, everyone walks in that way. It's just that, like you said, it's a perspective. But you hit on something that I think is pretty key and important is when you're enforcing codes, it's always wise to understand the why the code is the way it is. And normally when you can explain the why, people are like, oh, I never even thought about it from that perspective, right? It's the perspective thing that you mentioned. But the why is so important. And I think that's a key component of how we as code officials can be successful, is that we say, not because I said so, and not because it's written in the book. It's because this is the reason why we enforce exit width. We can explain it from a technical perspective, that we're funneling a whole bunch of people in a small space at a short amount of time, and that's why we need exit width. Or that's why we need whatever X, Y, or Z in the code. And the more we can explain why things happen, the better we can achieve code compliance in a partnership with our customers. Because I really think that that's what we do. I'm going to give out one little secret. My favorite interview question is when I interview folks is which one of the three phrases best describes a code official, a plan checker, or whatever job I'm interviewing for? It's design critic, law enforcement officer, or code consultants.
And I would go with C.
And and Tim, you're hired, because that's really what I think our job is to consult, to help consult with our folks. Yes, I believe both the other two are not wrong. I mean, there is a law enforcement component to what we do, and we do enforce codes and standards. And sometimes when we're in the code enforcement world, it's a little more law enforcement. But in plan checkers and inspectors on the new construction activities, it's a lot about being a code consultant, helping them through understanding the reason why why the code says what it says, and why we're asking for certain things a certain way.
Well, and that's why I always invest in the commentary. I think that the commentary for the code is one of those key things that without having that, sometimes you don't understand the why. And if you don't understand the why, it's like, well, it says here in chapter such and such that you have to do it this way. I don't know why, but I don't always agree with things, but this is why you have to do it.
Yeah.
And so having the commentary is always one of those things that I really appreciate, because it's allowed me, especially as I looked at some alternative means and methods, to be able to provide a little bit more of that why and kind of walk them through it. And I have a similar question on some of my interviews is when do you think education education would be a pathway to implementing the code, and when is it for enforcement? And as you, like you just said, like law enforcement, yes, sometimes you have to be the bad guy. You have to say, no, you can't do this. But I really think that, especially, is for me, I tell my staff, we're always fire and life safety educators. And so we're always trying to, educate them on the code. No different than I would try to be doing education out in the public at a high school or an elementary school to talk about stop, drop, and roll and those types of things. Now I'm trying to educate you on the code and why this is a risk. And I'm sure you get this too, is like, well, we've done this, all over the place. And you're the first person to tell me that I don't have to do this. And so I don't believe you. And so, and so you have to kind of walk through that. I've gotten that a little bit. And so it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of extra effort to at least explain the why. And I think that we get there eventually. So,
yeah, and to that is that if you teach the why, it's the old adage of you give a guy a fish, you teach him to fish. You help an architect, a design professional, a contractor on a certain component of the code. He understands it. I mean, you take a couple of minutes and you learn it, and you don't do that again. So next time that submittal comes in, you're not seeing the same issue overlooked. So it helps you in the long run as well.
Well, and that's what I tell people is like when I do plan check or when I do inspections, I'll be honest, I wish I had to issue 0 comments because because the comments typically that takes time for me. So I'm trying to get through this. I don't want to delay it, because the more comments that I have, the more, the more back and forth, and I want to try to help you. And so the more that we can work together and be able to get that final design or pass that inspection, the better it will be. So, But so you mentioned you had a little bit of code enforcement. You worked in code enforcement, had code enforcement experience, and did a lot of inspections of existing construction. So one of the things when you did that, how did you interact a little bit with like maybe external stakeholders like the fire department? Because I would imagine that you probably were working closely with them on some fire and life safety issues, should those arise, or other things that with people working without a permit.
Yeah, so we oftentimes we had situations where we had, in addition to just having a building code violation, there were fire issues. Right? They did a room without a permit, or modified something, affected the sprinkler coverage, affected where fire alarms were located. We had to interface with fire. We had to interface with planning on zoning issues, because in some of these cases, you have more restrictive requirements in planning from a zoning perspective, that you can build things or use buildings in certain ways. And so there's opportunity to engage agency stakeholders internally much more than what you normally do in the permitting and the inspection process. In addition, even public works, we had some projects where there was a grading permit, some grading activities that were done without permit, in a little bit more of the rural area of Clark County, and we had to bring in some of the experts from public works, because they dropped. I'm sorry, they didn't drop. They stopped up some drainage channels along the way, and so we had to get some violations noted on that component as well. So again, we were definitely trying to have to work with different stakeholders within the agency outside that. And then there were other cases where we had a team that we went out on with Metro and with fire and a number of other agencies, mental health and safety and health organizations, and did a sweep on some of these projects that were well-known bad off projects that had multiple violations. And so we interfaced with those folks as well, and there was some criminal aspect to that. And it's just kind of a really interesting scenario to work with that. So that's kind of one of those things that you acquire in your life as a life experience, and sometimes it's good, but sometimes you wish you don't have to ever go back and do that again.
Yep. Yeah. Because some of those areas that you go into, they're, the socioeconomic impact, like we were talking the other day, is We in California, I'm sure it's similar to you in Las Vegas. We have the unsheltered population, a large unsheltered population, and some of these substandard housing areas, and working with people to try to bring them up to code. But sometimes they can't bring them up to code. That sometimes they're so dilapidated that it almost makes it more dangerous, right? We're trying to give them some shelter, but how do we balance that? And you make sure that we're trying to take care of them as much as we possibly can. Sure. So
absolutely.
So. Now, since 1986, you've been in the industry since about 1986 or so, right?
I was in the industry, and I came to building department in 92. I came to Vegas in 86.
So from that, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen? And especially maybe in Las Vegas, because there are a lot of unique things within that region, but what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
Wow. So I will tell you this. When I started in 1992, I got my assignment, I got my desk, I got a pad of paper, pencil, I got a telephone, right? I got a pair of work boots and a hard hat. But I didn't have a computer.
Right. Yep.
I didn't have a computer. I had a radio that I had when I went out to the field, but I didn't get a computer for like 6 months. So a computer was something that was not part of my work environment. My supervisor had a computer. But if I had to type a memo, if I had to have a memo written or I had to document something formally, I actually wrote it out on a piece of paper and handed it to one of the secretarial pools. I'm aging myself, right? The administrative staff, I think is what I call them now. But I actually have to write that stuff out, and then they would have to type it for me. And lo and behold, I got a computer, and we were using WordPerfect as a word processing.
Oh, wow.
And so I don't know, a lot of people are on YouTube have no idea what WordPerfect is. But it was a word processing program, but you didn't actually see the document in its printable format. If you wanted to bold the title, you put like a caret B for bold to start it and a caret B to end it, and you had to visualize what it looked like. So thinking about that for 30 years now, and internet and email and video conferencing and electronic plan review and real-time inspection resulting in the field, it's just a light year. It's like not just a career's worth of innovation. It's like a century's worth of innovation in this field since I started in the early 90s. So for that perspective, it's changed quite a bit. From a Vegas perspective, man, I'm going to tell you, these buildings got bigger and more complex and higher usage and multiple usages than we've ever seen before. It used to be you had a casino, you had a buffet, you had a pool, and a hotel. And then there's the showrooms, and there's outdoor pool day clubs, and there's nightclubs in the casinos, and there's in some of the casinos they actually have a full-fledged sport arena or concert arena. So I mean, it really the building just started to grow exponentially, and it was kind of like it was probably 1989 when I was still in college that the Mirage opened up, and I remember I think I was in school, and the Mirage was opening up, and my wife and her friends were all going down to see the volcano at the Mirage for the first time when it was first opening. It was like 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or something. They were all on the strip, and they had to go down and see the volcano at the Mirage. And I mean, from that perspective, and how we've just morphed into this massive entertainment city is just amazing. And the things that I've seen in the car shows and the event scenario, the event arenas that we've done in Vegas, it's just amazing. And then the new project right here down at Fremont Street, the city of Las Vegas has very first all-new casino on Fremont Street since 1975 that was opened a year ago.
Oh, geez.
We permitted it in early 2017.
Okay.
It was opened about a year ago, called Circa. It's got like it's the sports book is it's almost a city block long, and it's a story and a half tall. The sports book viewing screens with stadium seating. It's amazing. It's an amazing venue to watch sports and just uniqueness of that, because there was a code issue obviously with the atrium concept with a floor, another floor, and then another communicating floor, and so we had some alternate methods and materials to deal with concept of does that create an atrium or not, and so again, it's more than two floors communicating, so we had to deal with some code issues with that. But it's a great project, and it's just getting, like I said, things are just getting bigger and more complex, and then they have Circa has the pool area, the stadium swim.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, things have just gotten more. Just it's. There's an old adage, I guess, when I was growing up, is keeping up with the Joneses.
Yep.
Yeah, it's keeping up with the Wins and the Adelsons and the Derek Stevens and the MGM Internationals. So it's that's the neighborhood they're dealing with. So
that's impressive. And so, like you just said, when you were talking about like technology and how that has increased exponentially, I heard on another podcast I was listening to, like the Industrial Revolution, right? That took like 100 years to, from like steam engines to, to gas turbines to where we are now. I think that because of technology, all that is shrinking. And like you mentioned, from 92 till 2021, and even I would say in the last 3 years, we've seen like technology increase to be able to do all these remote platforms and inspections. It's just it's wild to see that, right? It's wild to see how much technology has increased. I remember when I first started, I had a pager, and I was like, what the heck am I going to do with this thing? Because I'd already had my first cell phone, but they're like, nope, you get a pager, and I'm like, okay. And so, but over time, the cell phone came, but there were no smartphones, right? There were no, iPhones. And so that technology has increased. I mean, heck, this has more computing power than I think that probably my first computer did. I think I have 128 gigs of memory in that. In my desktop, I had like 5 or 8 or something like that. So I was routinely deleting things because I couldn't, store anything else. Now, you mentioned like all the bigger projects. One of the things that I kind of see, and I want to get your perspective, if we might see, because code typically isn't always, the code cycle can't always stay up with the current kind of development community, right? And so do you ever think that we'll see a time where maybe that code development cycle will be shorter? To try to help address some of these other newer concepts that are coming in almost daily, it feels like.
Oh wow, that's a great question, because I would be one that advocate to put the code cycle longer.
Okay.
Because it's funny you mentioned this, because the first thing that popped in my head when you said that is when I first started in the business, I was under we just adopted the 91 code, and so I got my 91 IBC, and it is torn apart. I had that code, it felt like forever.
Yeah.
And now it feels like the code cycle happens so fast that the industry's not keeping up in the general terms of keeping things moving forward. But you bring a great point, is that things do change quite a bit.
Yeah.
Design concepts change, things not intended by the code. And maybe there's a mechanism at some point we can look at some intermediate modifications. And I think that's a nice thing that we have in the codes that are written, that the code folks knew that they weren't going to be able to keep up, is having modifications and alternate methods and materials. But I probably would advocate for codes to be on a longer code cycle, just so it doesn't, because now they feel like as soon as I get adopting one code, I'm turning around
back into it.
And the other thing I was just thinking of is that I was telling somebody the other day, I made a code reference, and they go, I don't think that's what the current code says. and I said, okay, well, let's look it up. And they looked up, and it wasn't in the 2018 code. I said, well, I apologize. Still got projects we're working under the 2012. We have the 18 adopted, right? We're working on adopting the 21. and I'm sitting on the IRC committee for the 24 codes. So at any one time, I have like 4 different code books running through my head at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that you try not to memorize. I never try to memorize anything from the code, but sometimes just by default, those things do creep in your head. But I learned a great lesson from Doug Thornburg one time when I was teaching a class with him, and we were talking. Someone asked a question. I said, "I don't know. Let's look it up." And Doug goes, "Put it away. Put your code book away. Code book ruins good code conversation." Because you can just look it up, right? But this goes back to the why. Yeah. Understanding conceptually the intent of the code and why we're doing what we're doing. It doesn't matter what the code says. What do we believe it says? And then maybe we can go back and see exactly what it says. But how do we all feel it really should be? What is it? What do we think it means? So I thought that was a great comment. And whenever we have a little internal discussion about code and someone pulls a code book out, I go, no. Code books ruin good code conversation. When we settle on what we think it means, then we'll look it up.
That's a good perspective. I guess I'd never consider that, because typically I'm like, okay, let's see what the code says, and I always, like, if I have a staff member come to me, what's the code say? What research have you done? And so, but I do like because you're right, because that deliberative process sometimes is, actually many times is very enlightening to kind of see the perspective that somebody has on what the code is. And so it's always interesting to kind of see, it kind of gives you the behind the scenes, behind the curtain, to be able to see how people think. And, how can you help them shape their interpretation of, future codes, right? So that's a good idea. I'm going to have to use that. I'm going to use that.
Try that.
Yeah, I like that.
Code book ruins good code conversation. That's a Kevinism.
I'm gonna splice this section. Where are we at? We're at about 42 minutes in, and so at 42 minutes, I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna splice it, and we're gonna put it on Facebook, so that way everybody can relive this, because I think that's a great idea, because I'm gonna start doing it now. So see, these podcasts and these discussions are also good for me, because it helps me to learn a lot more that I didn't already know. So that's always good. Well, it's a good for me.
Absolutely.
It's very beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely.
So question for you. So being, and I know that you're very deep into code development, so I wanted to ask is, how do you connect with the International Code Council? Since this is Region 1, and I know that you are the past president, but how else do you connect with ICC?
Wow. So before I was the president of ICC Region 1, I was the treasurer. Matter of fact, I think I was doing both at the same time. I was the treasurer of the Southern Nevada ICC chapter. And as the treasurer of that chapter, with EduCode came a lot of interface with ICC staff on coordinating payments and classes and costs and whatnot. So I've had an opportunity to meet with Tracy Lindy and Mark Johnson and people that work at ICC. So that was kind of a great experience for me. So the other things that obviously being the treasurer, being with ICC Region 1, being the snowball chair. But, I was in the 21 IRC Code Development Committee. I was in the 2018 IBC General Committee. So I like being involved in the code development process, especially on the dais. That's a big responsibility. And I would tell you that there is a boatload of work the month before you go to code hearings, because then they give you the 300 proposals, and you have a month to review 300 code proposals before you go up with it.
Right.
And I'm one of those people that I'm not going to go sit up there and not have read every single code change proposal and don't look educated or thoughtful on those code changes. So I'm going to take it upon myself to review every single one of them, even if I'm reviewing the last 50 or so on the plane to the conference. So I like that part of it. I would say also that I'm currently serving on the ICC Residential Seismic Assessment and Retrofit Committee. It's a mouthful, I know. Okay. So I'm working on that committee. I had a meeting a couple hours ago with those folks, and we're talking about some really smart engineers and guys in California and Washington and some of the folks in seismic prone areas that really have a lot of experience and knowledge, and really blow me away on how really smart they are, and I feel very, very humbled to be in their presence, because there's a lot of good folks there. But I get to provide some input on a code official perspective, because they're thinking academically and things like that. I'm like, well, and we have some contractors on there too as well.
Right.
But it's good to have that three-way academic, installation, regulatory concept on that. So I like doing that part. I like being a part of the ICC code development process. I consider myself a code geek. I think I could sit in 2 weeks of code hearings and just enjoy listening to the conversation that people have. It's so interesting to me that somebody can come up with a code change proposal, and you can read it and it makes sense, right? Yeah. And then there's 20 people saying this is not a good idea because of this, this, and this. And, and you think about every single thing that gets into the code, most of those things probably had some level of debate, and it's not 100% consensus. We all don't agree that everything got in there. It's voted on. It's appealed through the public comment process. But it's interesting just to hear the overall perspectives. It's that same comment I made earlier about a code book ruins good code conversation. Why is it we're doing what we're doing? And that goes back to the earlier comment we made too about the why. Going to code hearings and being involved in the code development process gives you a really good perspective on the why of the code, and you understand why. And even the stuff that's in the code, you understand it's not like the sky is blue or 2 + 2 = 4.
You're right.
So it's a lot of that understanding, where some of those boundaries are, and when the code change proposals got approved, what the concept was, what the thought process was behind it. And I think it's great that ICC has those code changes on video and just community discussions, and so we can archive and go back and look at some of those things if we need to.
Yeah, I would say so. You and I met each other there in Pittsburgh, and I don't know if I could sit through 2 weeks. That's a long time. But so we were there for a week, but also too watching the committee action hearings online, and then also going to the public comment hearings in person, and being able to see those discussions. And like as you mentioned, like you would think that if somebody's going to submit a code proposal, they've kind of vetted it, they've researched it, and we've done it here, through our organization as well. When we go to prepare a code, a new code section to either the fire or the building code. And then you're like, okay, it's good to go. We're not going to get any pushback. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes out and they start critiquing it. Perspective, right? And so well, you didn't intend this consequence or this consequence or this consequence. And you're like, you're right, we didn't. And so you see how it gets shaped, and how public comment even further shapes that code section. And then you have discussion on public comment, because maybe those aren't always good. Right. And then to see the votes go down by, see something get passed by 3 votes is always impressive, because that is something that's likely going to go in, or it's going to get voted, through the government process at the end. And it still may go in, but it only got in by 3 votes through that public comment. So I do find that interesting. Also, too, I do enjoy the bumper music that they play between votes. So I do enjoy that. And so I created quite the playlist. It's 24 hours long of all the music that they played in Pittsburgh. So, or at least from Wednesday on. So I tried to keep as much as I could. So, the nice thing about the code hearings is, I don't know, Mike, folks know Mike Pfeiffer, who's vice president or president of codes and standards for ICC. Apparently, he must be a classic rock fan, because all the code hearings I've ever been to under ICC have all been classic rock. And I'm with you. I'm like, I don't think I know this song, or this song's not on my playlist. I'm going to download this song when I get home. So thanks. Now shout out to Mike Pfeiffer for doubling my my playlist, because of all the great classic rock that he plays at the code hearings. So even if you don't like the code hearing stuff, you get a lot of classic rock music at the code hearings. So you get 2 for 1. If you're a classic rock geek and a code geek, it's a 2 for 1. And you can sit there for 2 weeks, listen to classic rock and great code conversation. Yeah, and there's always one of those things when the music doesn't come on. People are like, what the heck? Where's the music? we don't have the music, the voting music.
Yeah.
So, but I use Shazam quite a bit over that course of those like 5-6 days.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So Shazam, I was like, I got to hurry up and get this, and everybody, and so it's always one of those things that as you're sitting next to people, do you know this one? Do you know this one? And you're trying to quiz each other, and you're like, well, I've heard this one before, but I don't know who sings it. So let's hit Shazam. Let's get it downloaded.
Let's get this downloaded. Let's figure out what it is. I'm with you, man. I'm totally with you.
Well, so my next question would be, so how do you stay informed? I mean, you're definitely involved in the code development process, but how do you really stay informed through that process and just make sure that you're on the leading edge of all those things that are coming down, so that way as you're helping to develop the code, that it's kind of it's actually addressing what a current need is?
So one of the things that I think is important, obviously being at the code hearings and talking to other people in our industry outside of your own area, even as great as Region 1 is and as great as the Californians are, it's good to get a Colorado, it's good to get a Midwest experience, it's good to get the South experience, Northeast experience, and talk to people outside your region and your area and become. And that's the great thing about it. I mean, code geeks are code geeks, and we all get together and talk, and it's good to have that camaraderie. Right. So networking with people at code hearings from a national perspective, I think, is one way you can do that. But on the other side, locally, I think it's important that you stay active with local folks that are in like NAIOP and the AIA chapters in your local areas. I think that's really super important. I got a couple of contacts in those groups that I stay active with, but I'm also very active with the plumbing, heating, cooling contractors of Nevada, IATMO, Southern Nevada, the International Association of Electrical Inspectors. I can never say the acronym because I always mess up one of those vowels. The Southern Nevada Home Builders, the Nevada Contractors Association. I mean, I go to all their monthly meetings. I'm trying to make it a point to be at these places so they know who I am. They see my face. They know me. They can pick up the phone, and it's not calling some stranger that they don't know. If they have a problem, what are the things that they're seeing in their industry that we're doing or we're enforcing or we're seeing in a code perspective that we can help them navigate either through a code change proposal or through consideration of like how this impacts the industry. But just being there and being part of the construction industry, I think is really, really important, especially if anyone is out there who wants to be a code official someday. I think that's probably, really important, is to have that face-to-face connection. Yeah. I mean, the PHC invites me to their Christmas party. The PHCC, I've just a fascination with these guys because they are just the greatest bunch of people you ever want to hang out with. They are very fun. They're very serious about the plumbing and mechanical world. They have a great apprenticeship program. They have a chili cook-off and car show every fall here in Vegas.
Oh, wow.
They have an apprentice thing in the spring that they do where apprentices are building their benches and working through that process of learning and competing for a national opportunity. And so they're just a fun-loving group, and I just really I take 3 Saturdays out of my out of my life to go hang out with the plumbers, and my wife just rolls her eyes, "You're going with those guys again." I mean, you have not lived. I will tell you this: they have this chili cook-off in the spring. You have not lived until you've eaten chili out of a toilet.
Wow. Well,
they serve chili.
I hope it's clean.
It's clean. It's clean. Yeah, it's a new toilet.
Yeah, that's even better because I don't even want a clean used toilet to be my bowl for chili. So
I saw that. I was like, I'm not doing it. Oh no, it's the ritual. You're a new guy. You got to do it.
You're the new guy. So they set up the new guy. That's probably what it was. It was a setup.
It was a setup. It was one of the people that had the chili contest. They served it out of the toilet.
Interesting.
So, only plumbers.
Well,
only plumbers. But, gotta love them.
Well, we're nearing an hour, but what I want to ask, because I know that you and all the other Southern Nevada building officials are hosting EdgeCode. And EdgeCode, I think, I've been there. I think it's great. I wish I could go again this year. I don't know if I'm going to make it. But as we talk about that, and we talk about training and bringing on new staff, what do you think are some of the essential skills for people? Because our profession, unfortunately, is starting to age, and we're not getting as many new, younger people into the profession as what I keep trying to tell my son to, hey, be a fire inspector, be a building inspector. I think you'll get a lot of enjoyment out. He's like, I'm not doing that. He's like, I'm going to mess with my car. I'm going to go work here, but I'm not going to do that. So what skills do you find or do you consider to be the most essential for somebody that may want to pursue this field?
The most essential, I believe that probably the most essential is to be able to communicate, to be able to listen to people and hear things out and be analytical. I think that is really the most important part is, somebody's telling you the reason they're doing something from a code perspective and you cut them off.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to hear the full story. You're closing your mouth. You got to listen, and you got to be able to communicate and talk, and you got to have that open communication with you. That's the key thing. That's the most important piece, in my opinion, is you have to have a good communication skills with people. I think that's super important. The technical stuff, I think you can learn. I mean, I didn't know much about, fire-rated assemblies when I was doing structural plan review. I knew they existed, but, accident width, and I didn't know anything much about that. I learned it, right? I learned it on the job. I went to EdgeCode, I learned that stuff. I think, being a good, and just wanting to be a good public servant and wanting to do a good job every day and communicating. I think those are a good work ethic. Because as you know, this profession isn't necessarily like a factory where an F-150 comes through the line every 60 seconds and you got to put the tires on the car or you got to put the tailgate on the bed of the truck, right? Every 60 seconds, you got to do something. There's a lot of times you have to have that initiative to get stuff done. So having initiative, being able to listen and communicate with people, and having some of those analytical skills that we talked about earlier is important. But I think if you have the initiative and the communication skills, then you can be very successful in this business. But it's funny you mentioned this because I think as you said, is like the younger generation. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. The younger generation is all about technology, right? They don't have. My kids went to college and they didn't have textbooks. They had books on their computer.
Right.
I have a stack of code books on me because I'm an old guy, right? but it's this business is moving towards this technology. I said earlier that I didn't even have a computer when I started for 6 months, and now I have like 3 computer screens in my office. I have a giant plan review desk in my office. My inspectors all carry tablets and use that. They're all doing electronic plan review. My inspectors are doing video inspections. You and I are on a video call. This is stuff that I never dreamed would have happened in the 90s. Right. But it's all here now. And all of this is going to be more technology. This business will become more technologically driven. There will be more innovations. I keep thinking about how do we, the one piece that I'm struggling with from an innovation perspective is how do we get, inspectors are more, I think probably most inspectors are on some kind of digital platform where they take a tablet or a laptop out to the job site and do their inspection. But how do they, like plan checkers, review a set of drawings for a bigger project? On a tablet, you can look at a small tenant improvement or a water heater or HVAC replacement on your screen pretty easily. A block wall permit, pretty easy on a small screen with a couple of drawings. When you get into a fairly big project, how are we going to get that piece to the inspector so they can be effectively be able to look at full-size drawings on a major project on a small device and a small screen? So I think
do you end up, is it like a wearable, right? Like maybe glasses and being able to, connect glasses. And so that way they can control it on, but then that might make you sick, right?
So I don't, because all the technology that we've made improvements to bring e-plans into the office, right? Yep. We still have we still have contractors printing plans for our inspectors out in the field on the bigger jobs, on the track homes. because that's what everyone's still accustomed to. That's what everyone's still using. But at some point, we got to move that technology digitally to the next level, to the fields. And it's a lot more complicated because you know, an inspector's not going to want to carry around a 30-inch monitor out to a job site to look at plans. You know,
might be a touch heavy.
It might be a little touch heavy, but you know, maybe it's some new technology that it's accessed faster through the web as we get the There wasn't even that Wi-Fi when it came out. There wasn't even G's when I first learned about Wi-Fi, you know. So I mean, now
we're up to the 5G.
Now we're up to 5G. So maybe maybe another 10 years or no, we'll be up to 8 or 9G, and the technology will be so fast that they'll be able to pull plans for a Circa hotel and casino, and they'll be able to flip
just by
plans
press a button
so fast that it's almost like having that paper. Because back in the old, Tim, it sounds like you and I go back from the old school where you kind of knew where the detail sheets were, and you could grab 80 sheets and flip it over, and you're pretty close to the detail sheets.
Be right there,
right?
Yep.
But we need to get that kind of where can we get that technology and that kind of ease for our inspectors, because they have a short amount of time they need to be on a job site. So that's
how do you make it functional?
And that's the innovation that will be the next step from this digital world. And so that's where I think if we're trying to encourage the younger generation into our businesses, we got to engage them in the innovation that we've made in the past, and we've made especially during COVID. We've accelerated. I mean, we did a leap year of innovation during COVID. I think most building departments went a leap year of leaped.
I agree.
A light year into innovation through COVID. But the next generation, that's how we bring these next generation of people into our business, is tell them how exciting the new innovations and the opportunities that exist in the innovative part of our business.
Yeah, because it's all going to be technology driven. I see the remote inspections, and I think that remote inspections, for me, to be able to utilize remote inspections, and we haven't really done hardly any remote inspections, but the concept of it, I just think, is so fascinating. And how do you get there to be able to make it even better than what it is today? Instead of for a 10-minute inspection, is there some way that I can utilize technology to accomplish that, instead of investing? Really, we talk about energy, the gas, and all the additional resources that it's going to take me to get somebody out there. Now that means we're going to be doing a lot more of things, right? So that just means more things are going to be, instead of the drive where you can decompress a bit, and now you don't have that. But I'd really like to see that, and see that in even digital plan review. Eventually, there's going to be an algorithm that's just going to spit it all out. And so I'll be interested to see how that works.
It's interesting you mentioned the decompressing, because I was thinking about one of my plans examiners that was telling me about when a couple months we were into e-plans, right? And he said, the one thing I miss about the old paper process is physically rolling up the plans, that sense of accomplishment, right, of rolling up the plans, and then taking them back down to the repository. I got 5 or 10 minutes to walk down and pick up a new set of plans. I got to decompress for a few minutes. I wasn't sitting in my office. In the digital world, you click close, you click open to the next project. And so, and I totally understood where he was coming from, because I remember that kind of same thing. And then, of course, as a manager now, I'm like, well, that's great. Shut down and start the next one. Boom, more efficiency.
You're back on it. You're going to get 3 more plans done today. That's great.
You do that 5 times in a day. I get 1 extra plan review done every day. So, as a manager, I think it's great. But from a human perspective, it's that like you said in the inspections, you get 5 minutes or 10 minutes of decompress from going from job site to job site, and sometimes that's good for your mental health, just to have that little bit of a break. So
I agree. I think that that's one of the things that I've been trying to explore more of, especially during COVID and post-COVID. Well, I don't even say we're post-COVID yet, but we're starting to transition. I hope we're starting to transition and keep moving forward. Fingers crossed. Yeah. But how do we? I think that's been one of the I don't want to say unwritten, but not necessarily highly considered is the mental health of a lot of our code professionals, and I hope that we continue to do that. For me, I try to work on meditation. I try to recommend that to others. But how do we continue to decompress, deal with stress, because sometimes it can be high stress, right? And so how do we take care of it, and what's going to be the pathway moving forward? And I do use my drive home, or my drive from the office to home, as just a time to breathe a little bit. Listen to a podcast, maybe this podcast. So if you're still listening, so you can listen to this podcast, and maybe not necessarily think about things, and maybe kind of just drift off a bit, and just really, what's in front of me on the road, and that's really about it. Get into that. I think it's the Daniel Kaufman, where think something about thinking slow and acting fast, or something like that. You system 1, system 2, all this other stuff, but being able to think, use that, and just be able to drive and kind of zone out a bit, and kind of reflect on the day.
Absolutely.
So before we end, one of the things I wanted to, hopefully, there's still time, but give you an opportunity to visit and be able to share some information on EduCode. So hopefully that there are people still listening that may want to attend, and kind of what EduCode is.
So EduCode is our weekly, a full week training class in all areas of building codes, electrical, structural, mechanical, plumbing, leadership, certification classes. We have a number of tracks available to folks who are in our business to get educated. Obviously, we have continuing education requirements that are required by us to keep our certifications. But this is a fun place to get the training you need, a really quality, high-level education locally in Las Vegas. The great thing about it is it's pretty good cost, and it's pretty great place to be. The hotel rooms are really reasonable because it's midweek in Vegas, and if anyone knows, midweek in Vegas is always the best time to come from a price point perspective. We also just don't teach you classes and then send you on your way to go sit in your hotel room. And we have events on Tuesday night at the Mardi Gras party. Wednesday night it's usually the vendor appreciation night, and Thursday is the bowling night. So we have 3 different social venues where you can interact with your fellow code officials and peers and folks you came with, and have really good time as opposed to just sitting in your hotel room rereading the code book that you just read for 8 hours, or finding other trouble that you could possibly get into in Las Vegas. But that's a podcast for another day. But it's a great venue. We've had a lot of great success in EduCode. We have ICC speakers. We bring industry experts from other areas. We have local folks that do classes here. We're doing this year with the where we were started with planning this event. We weren't sure where COVID was, so we're doing a hybrid model. We're doing both in-person classes and virtual classes. Last year was all virtual the first time. While I can't say enough about the Southern Nevada chapter be able to pull that off, and the technology to make that happen. I wouldn't say it was a smooth road every day, every minute, but it did go well. So we're going to have a virtual component and a live component. I think there's some real value of having live. I'm sorry, my battery's going down. I better plug my laptop back in. But there's a really good value in having live training classes as well. So we look forward to anyone who's going to be attending EduCode. If you're watching this, or will watch it in
Kevin,
the
future, are you still there?
And you come to EduCode, stop by and say hi, and say you love the podcast that Tim and I did today.
Yeah. For me, EduCode is, I've been there once. I really enjoyed it. I wish I could go again. I don't think I'm going to be able to go this year, but definitely next year. It's a highlight. I think that you haven't gone, and you're on the western side of the United States and you're looking for a class, I think that this is a highlight. And I know it is definitely one that you'll see registration links through on the ICC website as well, to be able to get in there. I know.
Educode.us.
Sorry.
Educode. Yeah. You didn't.
Okay.
I totally forgot to plug the website. Educode.us. Registration always opens right at the ABM. We always get our classes scheduled and get our brochure done for the ABM. So every single year, when you think ABM, think Educode as well, because that's when our registration opens. Educode.us is the website. All the classes are there, and you can do all the registration. You can determine what classes you need, and find out what social events are happening after hours at Educode as well.
All right. Well, Kevin, is there anything else you would like to add? That we're a little over an hour, so I try to, I don't want to keep you. I know you're a busy man. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up for the day?
No, I guess, if I were to say one thing is, we talked a little bit about the code development process, and I think, I try to plug that to some degree. But I think it's important for us as code officials to be involved. I continue to see less code officials at the meetings, and not a good balance between code officials and industry folks. So there's a great value of just being there learning, but there's also great value of having our voice heard in the code development process as well. So go there, for the first time, sit down, watch it for a few hours, and watch it for a few days, get to know how it works. Just listen. I mean, if nothing else, just go there to listen and understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's quite the process.
And you get a real appreciation.
I've only been through, I've been through 2 cycles. I went through the Group B cycle, and then now the Group A cycle, and I'll tell you that it has shaped me differently as a code professional, and also to be able to see all the people that are involved in the code development process. I will tell you that I've learned a lot just in the 4 years maybe that I've been on the Cal Chiefs Code Development Committee. So I agree with you 100%. So
be involved in the code development process. That's my. I'm probably going to retire in the next year or so. It's my plea to all people coming up in the business: stay involved in the code development process, because it's important. It's important for us. It's important for you to learn it as well. So,
absolutely. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. I want to thank Kevin for joining us and taking up some time. I cut into his lunch, I'm sure.
I ate lunch beforehand, so I knew I was going to go long, because that's who I am. I'm 15 minutes late for my next meeting, but that's who I am too.
We hope that you really enjoyed the insight that he shared. I think that he brings a much different perspective, and the experiences, I hope they help you, and especially as we talk about code development. Get involved in code development. That's what, to help shape the future. And I know that, I don't know if Gary Lewis ever listens to these podcasts from New Jersey, but I saw on the Building Safety Journal that he is retiring, and he has been highly involved, throughout his time, and so, get involved, help shape the code, do those things, get involved in your local chapter, provide feedback. And I think that that's just going to help us in the long term. And then, as always, I want to thank everybody for listening and watching. If you're still with us on Region 1 Radio, if you enjoy the show, please make sure to. I don't even know, but a lot of people still listen to us on Apple Podcasts. So make sure to rate the show, and hopefully, if you want to be on an upcoming episode, please let me know. I'm always looking for people. As Kevin knows, sometimes it's just out of the blue. I'll send you an email. So, and if you have any availability, it only takes a little bit of time, and we'll work through it together. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening.